Right now, the United States has exactly 800 Patriot interceptor missiles left in its entire global inventory.
Yeah, that's it. 800.
And the American defense industrial base, with all its might,
Yeah.
can manufacture a maximum of maybe 600 of these missiles per year.
Right, on a good year.
But then you look at this coming winter, and Ukraine is asking for 300 of them just to keep its power grid from completely shutting down.
It's just, I mean, the math is brutal.
Welcome to the deep dive. Because if you're looking at those numbers, you immediately see the problem we're facing today.
Oh, absolutely.
Today, we are going to unpack this unchangeable, really grueling math that is just quietly dismantling the entire global security order as we speak.
It really is. I mean, it's the ultimate reality check, isn't it?
Exactly. Because, if you aren't paying attention to these industrial constraints or the demographic realities driving world leaders today, you're essentially operating on an outdated map.
Right. We tend to view all these global alliances and security guarantees as permanent fixtures, like they're carved into the bedrock.
Yeah, like they'll always just be there.
Exactly. But what those production numbers show us is that the bedrock itself is fracturing. You simply can't maintain a massive, sprawling global security apparatus on a ledger that is mathematically impossible.
Which is exactly our mission today. We're mapping out the tectonic shifts that are completely rewiring global security.
Yeah, connecting the dots.
Right, connecting the dots between a rapidly changing East Asia, an American military apparatus that is stretched to its absolute limits, and the immovable realities on the ground in Ukraine.
And to do this, we're drawing really heavily on a recent, honestly incredibly revealing interview with Jennifer Kavanaugh.
Yeah, the Director of Military Analysis at Defense Priorities.
Right. Her breakdown of the data just cuts right through the daily political noise you hear on the news.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I feel like we have to start by looking past all the rhetoric coming out of Washington.
Oh, for sure. You have to focus on what the United States is actually capable of doing in the world right now.
Right, and looking past the rhetoric means acknowledging this massive gulf between what policymakers promise and what the underlying mechanics of power actually permit them to do.
Yeah, and if you really want to understand the current global fracture, you have to rewind a little bit and look at the whole pivot to Asia concept.
Ah, right, the famous pivot. I mean, this whole idea of strategic competition with China really took center stage back during the Trump administration, right?
Yeah, and it became the mainstream consensus in D.C. pretty quickly.
Right. And the implied promise there was that the U.S. was going to fundamentally reallocate its resources.
Yep, exactly. Like draw down legacy commitments in Europe, get untangled from the Middle East, and put all that military and diplomatic weight squarely on the Indo-Pacific.
But I mean, if you look at a deployment map today, that is absolutely not what happened.
Not even close.
The U.S. is, deeply entrenched in a volatile conflict in the Middle East right now, primarily dealing with Iran and its proxies. And the troop footprint in Europe hasn't diminished at all.
No, it hasn't. And what's fascinating here is the why behind that failed pivot. Like, why didn't it happen?
Yeah, why are we still everywhere?
Well, the U.S. strategy toward Beijing has quietly morphed as a result of this distraction because the U.S. just doesn't have the bandwidth for a pure militarized strategic competition across 3 different theaters.
Right, you can't be everywhere at once.
Exactly. So the approach to China has shifted away from outright confrontation and more toward establishing a sort of stabilized G2 balance of power.
So like a managed detente, essentially.
Yeah, essentially. But pulling that off requires a massive recalculation of how you handle flashpoints.
How so? Like, what does that look like in practice?
Well, it fundamentally changes the whole policy playbook. It means returning to a really strict strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan rather than the more hawkish posturing we saw just a few years ago.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and it also means quietly withholding or delaying certain arms sales, to avoid provoking Beijing while the U.S. is bogged down elsewhere.
Right, because we can't afford a flare-up there right now.
Exactly. And perhaps most significantly, it means exerting immense diplomatic pressure on regional allies to shoulder their own defense burdens.
Because the underlying reality is that American military primacy just isn't absolute anymore. The resources are finite.
Yeah, and we're seeing tangible evidence of this contraction. I mean, advanced systems like the Fayad missile batteries, they've actually been relocated from South Korea.
Wait, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the Indo-Pacific Command is even openly discussing scaling back joint military exercise.
Oh. I was trying to conceptualize what this actually feels like for a nation like Japan or Australia.
Yeah, it's got to be scary.
Right. It's almost like the global security environment is a banking sector.
Yeah.
And for decades, the U.S. military has acted as the central bank, right? Providing just unlimited security liquidity.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, so if a crisis flared up, the U.S. would just, print more security, deploy an aircraft carrier, send troops, issue a guarantee.
Right, you never had to worry about a run on the bank.
Exactly. But suddenly, the central bank is dealing with massive inflation in Europe and the Middle East, and they announced they are tightening the belt.
Yeah.
So if you are a regional bank in East Asia, knowing you share a border with a massive, highly capitalized competitor like China, you are going to panic.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. The liquidity really is drying up, and that fear of a sudden security insolvency, that is the primary driver of behavior in East Asia right now.
So Tokyo, Seoul, Canberra, they are watching this math just as closely as we are.
Oh, closer.
Yeah.
They see the U.S. burning through interceptors in the Red Sea. They see the strategic distraction, and they are absolutely terrified of facing a crisis without that central bank guarantee.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, they're frantically trying to hoard their own capital and establish, to use your analogy, independent credit unions.
Right, getting their own houses in order.
Yeah. They are heavily rearming and forming these really complex, interlocking defense cooperation agreements amongst themselves.
But they are distinctly not trying to build an Asian equivalent to NATO, right? The source material we have is very explicit about that distinction.
No, absolutely not. An Asian NATO is basically a geopolitical impossibility.
Why is that?
Well, when you look at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, you had a cluster of nations with relatively similar economic baselines. They shared cultural and political histories, and they were on a singular, contiguous landmass facing a unified Soviet threat.
Right, it made geographic sense.
Exactly. East Asia is the exact opposite. The maritime geography is incredibly vast and disconnected.
Oh, sure, it's all islands and peninsulas.
Right, and the cultural and historical divergences are profound. Plus, their individual strategic priorities regarding China vary wildly, mostly depending on their economic interdependence with Beijing.
Okay, so if not a NATO, what are they actually attempting to build?
They're building a latticework of bilateral and trilateral agreements. It's a decentralized infrastructure designed to raise the baseline of regional deterrence. In a world where the American footprint is receding.
But that raises a massive logistical and diplomatic question for me. If you are an East Asian middle power, how do you practically manage a rising assertive China in your own backyard without the U.S. acting as this impenetrable shield?
It's a huge challenge.
Because while Washington is distracted by Iran, Beijing is continuously expanding its operational tempo in the region, right?
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to recognize a fundamental paradigm shift in how we analyze state behavior.
What do you mean?
Well, in the Beltway, every single Chinese naval patrol or air intercept is reflexively labeled as unprecedented aggression.
Right, that's all you hear on the news.
And yes, some of those actions absolutely cross the threshold into deliberate intimidation, particularly in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
But from a purely historical and mechanical standpoint, it is actually entirely normal behavior.
Okay, I have to push back on the word normal.
Yeah.
Because for the nations on the receiving end of those patrols, I'm sure it certainly doesn't feel normal. It feels existential.
I totally get that. It feels existential because they have lived under an artificial security umbrella for 70 years.
Right, they've been protected.
Exactly. But if you look at the mechanics of great power politics throughout history, it is standard operating procedure for a nation of China's economic and military mass to establish dominance in its immediate maritime periphery.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's the exact same geopolitical physics that drove the United States to establish the Monroe Doctrine in the Western Hemisphere,
Right, like, this is our backyard, stay out.
Right. We don't have to endorse the behavior to understand that it is a predictable output of a rising power. And more importantly, it's an output that a distracted United States simply cannot reverse through mere diplomatic condemnation.
And the timing of all this is critical.
Yeah.
The U.S. entanglement in the Middle East creates this massive vacuum.
Oh, absolutely.
It allows China to aggressively exploit what strategists call the gray zone, right?
Yeah, the gray zone.
Like actions that are provocative but fall just below the threshold of triggering a formal military response.
Exactly. We're talking about normalizing a daily reality of aircraft entering air defense identification zones or naval vessels dictating terms in contested waters.
Just slowly shifting the baseline of what is considered acceptable.
Right, and the U.S. is completely boxed in. They can't forcefully interdict these gray zone activities without risking a kinetic escalation in the Pacific, all while they are simultaneously managing a powder keg in the Middle East.
So this brings us to a really critical juncture for these regional powers. The default instinct, which we have watched fail repeatedly in other theaters, is this belief that security is achieved by constructing an exclusionary bloc.
Right, a bloc explicitly aimed against your primary adversary.
Yeah. But if you attempt to build a rigid containment bloc against China in its own hemisphere, you are almost guaranteeing a kinetic conflict.
You really are. And here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Yeah.
Let's look at Japan.
Okay, yeah.
The historical grievances between Tokyo and Beijing aren't just political talking points. They are deeply entrenched, multi-generational animosities.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
The public polling on mutual trust between them is abysmal.
It's terrible. So how does a nation with that kind of historical baggage realistically balance its own rapid militarization with the need for delicate diplomacy, especially when the U.S. isn't in the room acting as the mediator?
That's a great point, because according to Kavanaugh's analysis in our source material, the underlying friction between China and Japan is actually a more volatile flashpoint right now than the situation in Taiwan.
Yeah, that specific bilateral relationship is probably the most dangerous fault line in the region.
Wow, more than Taiwan.
Yeah. The American drawdown, coupled with Japan's entirely rational fear of abandonment and those unresolved historical tensions, generates a classic security dilemma.
So Japan arms up, and China gets spooked.
Exactly.
Right.
Tokyo increases its defense budget and acquires counterstrike capabilities to deter Beijing. But Beijing views this not as deterrence, but as a resurgence of Japanese militarism.
Oh, right, given their history.
Yeah, so Beijing responds by increasing its own patrols. Both sides assume maximum hostile intent, and the spiral just accelerates toward that exclusionary bloc mentality.
But it's not the only path forward, is it?
No, it's not. If you want a blueprint for how a nation can survive and thrive next to a colossal neighbor, you actually have to look at Southeast Asia, and specifically the ASEAN model.
Okay, so you're talking about the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Exactly. Look at the mechanics of the relationship between Vietnam and China.
Okay.
Here are two nations with a long, incredibly bloody history of direct military conflict. They have ongoing, active territorial disputes.
Right, they fought a war not that long ago.
Yeah, in 1979. Yet today, Vietnam operates a highly capable, fiercely independent military apparatus for pure self-defense, while simultaneously maintaining deeply integrated, productive economic and diplomatic ties with Beijing.
So they balance it.
Right. They do not agree on everything, obviously, but they have mastered the art of hedging. The ASEAN framework itself is frequently criticized by Western analysts for being slow and consensus-driven, but that is actually its core strength.
Because it forces everyone to the table.
Yes, it forces continuous dialogue and prevents the formation of rigid, zero-sum alliances.
Because they have internalized the geographic reality.
Yeah.
I mean, when your border is permanently attached to a superpower, you don't really have the luxury of ideological purity, do you?
No, you definitely don't.
You have to thread this incredibly fine needle where you possess enough military capability to make an invasion unacceptably costly while continuously providing diplomatic off-ramps so your neighbor doesn't feel encircled.
Right, you have to do the hard work of diplomacy.
Yeah, you can't just close your eyes, plug your ears, and rely on an outside guarantor.
Which leads to what I honestly think is Kavanaugh's most profound insight in this entire analysis. She argues that the post-World War II American security guarantees have actually acted as a distortionary force in the region.
A distortionary force. That is a fascinating choice of words, because it implies the current reality is an illusion.
Yeah, exactly. It has allowed nations like Japan and South Korea to inhabit a sort of geopolitical bubble.
Right.
Because the United States assumed the ultimate burden of deterrence, these nations never had to fully grapple with the exhausting, uncomfortable, daily diplomatic concessions required to live alongside a power like China.
They just outsourced their grand strategy to Washington.
They did. So while an American contraction is undeniably destabilizing in the immediate term, In the long term, removing that distortionary bubble might actually be the only way to force these nations to construct a realistic, durable regional architecture.
One based on actual balance rather than artificial guarantees.
Exactly.
It's kind of like a heavily subsidized industry. If the government is constantly stepping in to cover your losses, you never bother to innovate or optimize your business model. You just coast.
That's a really good point.
But the second those subsidies are threatened, you suddenly have to figure out how to survive in the real market.
Yeah, you have to adapt fast.
And while East Asian powers are slowly and quite painfully waking up to this multipolar market reality, there is an entire continent that is aggressively refusing to accept that the 1990s unipolar moment is over.
Oh, I know where you're going with this. You're pivoting to Europe.
Yeah, let's look at Europe. And specifically, the diplomatic theater that played out in late June.
Right, the E3 statements?
Yeah, the E3, France, Germany, and Italy. They released these highly publicized, coordinated statements officially condemning Chinese military maneuvers around Taiwan.
Yeah.
And if you just read the press releases, it paints this picture of a unified global Western alliance standing shoulder to shoulder against autocracy. But if you look at the mechanical reality of what Europe can actually do in the Pacific, the whole thing just falls apart.
It completely falls apart. From a purely structural perspective, those statements from European capitals are an exercise in performative diplomacy.
Performative.
Yeah, they aren't directed at Beijing at all. They are a desperate, flashing distress signal aimed squarely at Washington.
Like, don't forget about us.
Exactly. The underlying message is, look at how aligned we are with your priorities in Asia. Please do not pivot away and leave us alone with Russia.
So they are frantically trying to bid up their own strategic market value to the U.S.
That is the exact dynamic. Because beneath all the rhetoric, European leadership knows that they possess zero capacity to alter the balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. I mean, yes, they have massive economic equities tied up in Asian shipping lanes, but militarily.
Militarily, Europe lacks the strategic airlift, the naval logistics train, and the sheer volume of munitions required to project sustained power halfway across the globe.
They just don't have the hardware.
No. In the event of a kinetic contingency in the Pacific, European contributions would be limited to, intelligence sharing and maybe some token asset deployments.
So for American war planners to factor European military weight into an Asian conflict would be a catastrophic miscalculation.
It would be a fool's errand.
So Europe is trapped in this agonizing paradox then. They are desperately trying to resurrect an era where the American hegemon underwrites global security because they know they're defenseless without it.
Right.
But simultaneously, their entire economic model is inextricably tangled with the very nation they are posturing against.
It is the ultimate strategic trap. I mean, Europe's industrial base and export markets are deeply reliant on Chinese demand and Chinese supply chains.
Right, they need China to buy their stuff and supply their parts.
Exactly. And simultaneously, they have engaged in a total decoupling from cheap Russian energy, effectively severing ties with Moscow.
So they're squeezed on both sides.
Yeah, they literally cannot afford to alienate Beijing. If the global architecture is fracturing into multipolar spheres of influence, Europe is completely adrift.
Wow.
They lack the unified political will and military integration to act as an independent pole themselves, so they're forced into this paralyzing, endless routine of hedging their bets.
And nowhere is this paralysis more visible and honestly more dangerous than in the realm of technology.
Oh, the tech sector is the perfect example of this.
This aspect of the source material was genuinely staggering to me. Europe just completely missed the boat on building its own sovereign, massive-scale tech infrastructure.
They really did.
They don't have a European equivalent to Silicon Valley or, a European Huawei. So they're forced to lease their entire digital nervous system from external powers.
And that leads to an impossible choice. Let's break down the mechanics of this tech trap, particularly concerning things like 5G networks, underwater data cables, and cloud infrastructure.
Okay, yeah.
If European nations opt for Chinese technology, they are integrating hardware and software that carry profound systemic espionage and security risks.
Right, you're letting the fox into the henhouse.
Exactly. But when Washington sees Europe even considering Chinese tech, the U.S. threatens to withhold its own advanced technologies and intelligence sharing.
So they force their hand. So Europe has to buy American.
Right. But that comes with its own extortionate price tag. American enterprise technology is vastly more expensive, and it binds Europe to U.S. corporate ecosystems.
Basically just transferring European wealth straight to American tech monopolies.
It's a form of technological vassalage. They are paralyzed by this dynamic, clinging to the fading hope that if they just demonstrate enough loyalty, a future U.S. administration will magically turn back the clock and restore the old, comfortable unipolar order.
But that is a losing bet. I mean, Europe is surrounded by compounding security threats, and their profound anxiety about American abandonment is making them act erratic.
Yeah, very much so.
They are trying to force the U.S. to remain the global policeman, not just in the Pacific, but right in their own backyard. And if you want to see what happens when that European paralysis collides with actual kinetic warfare, you don't look at diplomatic statements in Paris or Berlin.
No, you don't.
You look at the internal reality inside Kyiv.
Exactly. To truly understand the trajectory of the war in Ukraine, we have to look past the maps of the front line and analyze the political tectonics shifting inside the Ukrainian government right now.
All right.
Over the past year or so, we have witnessed a massive consolidation of power. President Zelensky has systematically removed towering figures within his own establishment.
Yeah, that's been making a lot of headlines, like dismissing General Valery Zaluzhny.
Right, the incredibly popular architect of Ukraine's early defense. He effectively exiled him to London as an ambassador.
Wow, exiled.
And we've subsequently seen the removal of other key figures, too, including the ground forces commander Oleksandr Sysky and the high-profile tech minister Mikhail Fedorov.
So what does this all mean? Because if you listen to the commentary on major Western networks, these reshuffles are consistently spun as a positive evolution.
Oh, yeah. Always.
It's framed as the methy beauty of democracy, right? Civil society demands accountability, public pressure mounts, and the executive responds by cleaning house. Is that an accurate mechanical read of what is actually happening?
If you analyze the internal power dynamics, the evidence points in the exact opposite direction.
Really?
Yeah. This volume of turnover at the highest echelons of a state fighting a grinding war of attrition does not signal democratic health.
What does it signal?
It signals an executive who feels deeply vulnerable, isolated, and is resorting to desperate measures to secure his own political survival. When you remove independent bases of power and replace them with loyalists, you are not improving institutional efficiency. You are building a protective moat around your presidency.
Wait, hold on. We are constantly told that Vladimir Putin is the one who requires this war to continue because his domestic political survival depends on a perpetual state of conflict.
Right, that's the common narrative.
Are you saying that same mechanical dynamic is now driving decision-making in Kyiv?
That is precisely what the analysis in our source material suggests. The war apparatus has morphed into a self-generating mechanism. In the absence of elections, and with martial law in effect, Zelensky's entire political legitimacy is tethered to the continuation of the war effort and the promise of maximalist victory.
So he can't back down.
No. Any pivot toward negotiation or compromise would likely trigger an immediate domestic political collapse for his administration.
But shifting the cabinet chairs around doesn't alter the physics of the battlefield.
It doesn't change a single foundational metric. You can fire every general in the Ministry of Defense, but it will not magically produce more artillery shells.
Right.
And it certainly will not solve the most devastating, unchangeable crisis facing the Ukrainian state right now.
Which is what?
A catastrophic deficit in human manpower.
Which brings us back to the ousted tech minister, Fedorov. He was the primary evangelist for this idea that Ukraine could essentially innovate its way out of a war of attrition.
Yes, exactly.
The pitch was that through a highly advanced, decentralized, drone-heavy military structure, Ukraine could offset Russia's massive demographic advantage.
It is an incredibly seductive narrative, isn't it? Particularly for Western audiences obsessed with tech solutions. But it is a complete illusion.
Why? I mean, drones are everywhere on the battlefield now.
True. Unmanned aerial vehicles, FPV drones, autonomous naval strikes, these have absolutely revolutionized tactical engagements. They make movement incredibly lethal.
Right.
But you cannot occupy a trench line with a quadcopter.
Oh, I see.
You cannot hold a contested urban center with a drone swarm. Positional warfare ultimately requires human infantry to physically hold ground, absorb casualties, and project force.
Right, you need boots on the ground.
Exactly. The manpower math is a foundational constraint. And the increasingly draconian conscription methods required to feed that meat grinder are fracturing Ukrainian society from the inside out.
So the human math is entirely broken. But the other foundational constraint is the industrial math regarding munitions.
Yes.
And this is where the deep dive into American stockpiles goes from concerning to genuinely terrifying for me. Because the messaging coming out of the Pentagon is completely schizophrenic.
It really is.
You have officials stepping up to the podium assuring the public, our stockpiles are robust, readiness is high, there is no shortage.
Right.
And in the very next breath, they are submitting requests for a $1.5 trillion defense budget heavily earmarked for emergency munitions replenishment.
The contradiction is glaring. I mean, if your inventory is sufficient for global deterrence, you do not require $1.5 trillion in emergency recapitalization.
Exactly.
To cut through the spin, we really have to look at the exact inventory data. And we need to separate the analysis into offensive strike capabilities and defensive interceptors.
Okay, let's run the numbers on the offensive side first.
Okay, so on the offensive ledger, the depletion rates are alarming, though perhaps not catastrophic just yet.
Okay, what are we talking about here?
The U.S. military has expended roughly 1/3 of its entire inventory of Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles.
A third, just gone.
Gone. And they have burned through approximately 25% of their joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, the JASSMs. And most notably, they have exhausted 100% of their initial stockpile of the new precision strike missiles, the PRSMs.
Using a third of your Tomahawks without even engaging in a major theater war against a near-peer adversary is a staggering burn rate.
It really is.
But the U.S. does maintain a massive stockpile of unguided or less advanced gravity bombs, right? So they still have a deep bench of offensive options.
Yes, that's true.
It's the defensive side of the ledger that made me stop reading and just stare at the wall.
Let's talk about the interceptors.
Yeah, this is where the mathematical reality becomes a full-blown strategic crisis. The backbone of the American ballistic missile defense network relies on two primary systems, the Patriot Advanced Capability Interceptors and the P-ATIS system.
Terminal High Altitude Area Defense.
Right. Over a very condensed timeline, primarily due to engagements in the Middle East, intercepting Houthi and Iranian projectiles, the United States has depleted an estimated 60% of its global stockpile of these specific interceptors. I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. 60% of the most advanced defensive missiles the U.S. possesses are just gone.
Yes. Based on current estimates, the United States military is sitting on a remaining global inventory of roughly 800 Patriot interceptors and a mere 250 THAAD missiles.
If we only have 800 Patriots left to defend U.S. assets globally, we must be running the factory's 247. What is the actual production capacity? Walk me through the industrial mechanics of replacing these.
The current maximum capacity of the American Defense Industrial Base is approximately 600 Patriot missiles per year.
600. That's it.
That's it. And you cannot simply flip a switch and double that number. The bottleneck isn't just funding. It's the sheer physical complexity of the weapon.
Right. They're not just like bullets.
No, these aren't artillery shells. A Patriot interceptor requires highly specialized solid rocket motors, incredibly complex radar seekers, and guidance systems that rely on supply chains stretching across multiple continents.
So you can't just build a new factory overnight.
Exactly. Expanding production requires building new, highly specialized facilities. You have to source rare earth minerals, train a highly skilled workforce. It is a multi-year lag time.
And here is where the math hits a brick wall. In the source material, it notes that Zelensky is currently petitioning Washington for 300 Patriot interceptors just to get the Ukrainian grid through the winter.
Right, and 300 missiles represents nearly half of the entire remaining U.S. strategic reserve.
Wow.
It is mathematically and strategically impossible for the Pentagon to fulfill that request without leaving American forces and allies globally defenseless.
Wow.
If the Russian military launches a coordinated strike package of 50 ballistic missiles, and they do that twice a week, those 300 interceptors are exhausted in less than a month.
And what about Europe? Can't they help?
Furthermore, the alternative European systems like the IRIS-T or NASAMS, they simply do not possess the kinematic capability to reliably intercept incoming hypersonic or ballistic threats.
So inevitably, you hear the armchair generals on social media saying, fine, if we can't build them fast enough, just give Ukraine the IP, give them the manufacturing licenses, and let them build the Patriots themselves.
Right, which demonstrates a profound ignorance of defense manufacturing.
Tell me why.
The Patriot system contains some of the most classified, closely guarded proprietary technology in the entire U.S. arsenal. You do not hand that intellectual property over to a nation engaged in an active war where espionage and capture are highly probable.
Oh, right, because if Russia captures one, they reverse engineer it.
Exactly. But even if you waived all security protocols, it takes 5 to 7 years to construct the sterile, highly specialized manufacturing environment required to build these seekers.
Right.
You cannot establish that infrastructure in the middle of an active war zone where it will be targeted and flattened by a Russian cruise missile the very day the roof goes on.
So let's look at the board here. Ukraine is staring down a winter where they lack the infantry to hold the zero line, and they lack the interceptors to protect their critical infrastructure from the sky.
It's a grim picture.
When a state faces that level of mathematical desperation, they start looking for Hail Mary passes. Which brings us to the incredibly controversial strategy regarding deep strikes, and specifically the attempt to involve Elon Musk and the Starlink network.
Yes.
Because Zelensky's logic is, well, if I can't shoot the missile down in the air, I have to go kill the launcher on the ground before it fires.
Precisely. Zelensky actively sought a high-level meeting with Elon Musk to propose a significant expansion of how the Starlink satellite constellation is utilized.
Right.
The operational concept was to leverage Starlink's real-time high-bandwidth data links to actively guide long-range Ukrainian strike assets deep into the Russian interior, specifically hunting for those mobile ballistic missile launchers.
But Musk ultimately declined to facilitate this, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay, let's set aside the geopolitical escalation for a second and just look at the military mechanics of that plan. Why is this plan to hunt mobile launchers fundamentally flawed on an operational level?
Because the history of modern air warfare proves that hunting mobile transporter erector launchers, or TLs, is a complete fool's errand.
Why is it so hard?
These vehicles are designed specifically to be elusive. They drive out of a hardened bunker, move into a dense forest or a crowded urban environment, fire their payload, and relocate within minutes.
So you have a tiny window.
Finding a truck in a country with 11 time zones is nearly impossible. To illustrate this, just look at the U.S. military's recent operations against Iran.
Right, the U.S. has the most sophisticated surveillance architecture in human history.
Exactly. The U.S. possesses an interlocking web of spy satellites, signals intelligence, and stealth drones that vastly exceeds anything Ukraine has access to.
Right.
During those operations, the U.S. military executed roughly 13,000 precision strikes. Yet, despite that overwhelming volume and technological superiority, intelligence assessments concluded that Iran retained over 50% of its mobile ballistic missile launching capability.
13,000 strikes, and you still leave half the threat on the board.
If the United States cannot eradicate a mobile missile threat in a concentrated theater, the notion that Ukraine, operating with patched-together strike assets and limited intelligence, is going to systematically hunt down Russian launchers across the vastness of the Russian Federation is a complete operational fantasy.
It's just not going to happen.
No. But even if it were possible, the strategic risk is apocalyptic.
How so?
Utilizing American commercial space architecture to actively facilitate and guide kinetic strikes deep inside a nuclear-armed adversary's sovereign territory completely obliterates the line of proxy warfare.
Ah, I see.
It is a massive escalatory leap toward direct conflict between Washington and Moscow.
So, we have established that the manpower is depleted, the defensive munitions are exhausted, and the deep strike strategy is operationally unviable. How does this grim reality square with the narrative we are being fed?
It doesn't square at all.
Because if you consume mainstream Western media, the tone is consistently triumphant. The prevailing story is that Ukraine's asymmetric drone strikes on Russian oil refineries and airfields are causing massive systemic chaos, and that the momentum of the war is fundamentally shifting.
Right. To understand that disconnect, you have to listen to analysts who actually look at the structural data, like George B., the former CIA director for Russia analysis.
Okay, what does he say?
He has been incredibly blunt about this, explicitly characterizing the tide is turning narrative as heavily curated NATO war propaganda.
Wow, calling it outright propaganda is a massive statement from a former CIA director.
He uses that terminology because the triumphant narrative deliberately obscures the grinding, mechanical reality of the front line. Tactical successes by Ukraine are amplified, while strategic shifts by Russia are severely downplayed.
What are we missing then?
Structurally, Russia maintains absolute dominance in the aerospace domain. While the West is wringing its hands over Patriot production, the Russian defense industrial base has successfully mobilized, effectively doubling its domestic production of ballistic and cruise missiles.
Doubling production. That's insane.
They are completely saturating a starving Ukrainian air defense network.
And what does the map actually look like on the ground, like physically?
On the ground, the momentum is undeniably with the Russian forces. They are advancing.
But we keep hearing they're stalled.
Now, the velocity of that advance has slowed significantly, yes. They are taking ground at perhaps a quarter of the pace they achieved during the initial phases of the war, but they are systematically grinding forward, and crucially, they are heavily consolidating those gains in strategically vital sectors.
So what's the forecast?
If the current mathematical trajectory holds, military analysts assess that within the next 12 to 18 months, the Russian military is highly capable of capturing the remainder of the Donbas region, including massive fortress cities like Kramatorsk and Sloviansk.
That's a huge shift.
Furthermore, the Russian command structure is demonstrating a terrifying ability to adapt. They have revamped their mid-tier logistics networks to make them more resilient, and they have heavily fortified the Crimean Peninsula against asymmetric attacks.
So they're adjusting to Ukraine's playbook.
Exactly. They are learning how to counter the very tactics that gave Ukraine the upper hand in 2022.
You know, this highlights a persistent analytical failure in how this war is covered. The confusion between a tactical victory and a strategic success.
Oh, 100%.
And there is no better example of this than the naval engagements in the Black Sea. A few months ago, the media was wall-to-wall coverage of Ukraine successfully utilizing sea drones to hit and sink several Russian naval vessels in the Sea of Azov and the broader Black Sea.
Right, I remember that.
In Western capitals, this was celebrated as a massive turning point. It was framed as a humiliating PR disaster for the Russian Navy.
And to be fair, it was an incredibly innovative, highly successful tactical operation by the Ukrainian military.
Definitely.
But warfare is an interactive system. You have to calculate the adversary's response.
Exactly. Because Moscow didn't just write off the ships and move on. That tactical humiliation provoked a disproportionate, devastating strategic retaliation.
It did.
The Russian military shifted its targeting matrix and began systematically obliterating commercial port infrastructure all along the southern Ukrainian coastline, particularly around Odessa.
And the mechanical result of that retaliation is that Ukraine, a nation whose economy is fundamentally built on agricultural exports, has been rendered functionally landlocked.
Right. And if you are listening to this and you're wondering why a destroyed grain silo in Odessa matters to your daily life, you have to look at the macroeconomics of it all.
Absolutely.
When you sever Ukraine's access to maritime commerce, you don't just crater their GDP, which means they require billions more in Western financial life support just to keep the government running. You send massive shockwaves through the global agricultural supply chain.
Yeah, the ripple effects are huge.
Food prices spike in the developing world, inflation ripples outward. It is the textbook definition of a Pyrrhic victory. You sink a few aging warships, and in return, your entire export economy is permanently disabled.
It perfectly illustrates the danger of that triumphant propaganda loop we were talking about. When you over-celebrate isolated tactical wins, you incentivize military planners to prioritize operations that generate good headlines and viral social media clips.
Even if it costs them the war.
Even if those operations trigger retaliations that cause irreversible structural damage to the state's long-term viability.
Okay, so if the board is this bleak, I mean, the human capital is exhausted, the interceptors are gone, the ports are ablaze, why is the diplomatic track completely dead? Why are there no serious negotiations happening?
It's a great question.
Because the source material points out that the diplomatic freeze is largely the result of a deeply flawed, highly contradictory strategy originating right in Washington.
Yes. There are faint, underlying attempts by the U.S. to probe for diplomatic openings. We recently saw a brief, highly publicized 35-minute encounter between U.S. Senator Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Right, the meeting in New York.
And the underlying chatter suggests they are attempting to discard the old Anchorage framework, which was the baseline set of assumptions that dictated U.S.-Russia-China dialogue over the past few years, and start with a blank slate.
Okay, so that sounds positive.
But the overarching dominant strategy dictating Washington's behavior remains maximum pressure.
Let's break down the logic of maximum pressure. The theory is that if the West continuously turns the screws, imposing unprecedented economic sanctions, levying massive tariffs, and seamlessly funneling real-time targeting intelligence to the Ukrainian military, Eventually, the pain will become so acute that Putin will be forced to the negotiating table to offer major concessions.
The theory is sound on paper, sure, but the execution is riddled with massive contradictions. Let's look at that Rubio-Lavrov meeting.
Yeah.
Marco Rubio steps up to the microphone and explicitly states that the United States is on Ukraine's side. Now, from a moral, ideological, or domestic political standpoint, that is exactly what Western audiences expect to hear.
Of course.
But diplomatically, the moment you publicly declare yourself a combatant on one side of a conflict, you instantly incinerate any credibility you had as an impartial mediator.
And Washington is the only actor capable of mediating.
Yeah.
Nobody else has the financial, military, or diplomatic leverage to underwrite a peace settlement.
Precisely.
If the U.S. removes itself from the role of the referee and declares itself a player on the field, the game can't end.
Any viable settlement requires massive concessions and guarantees from the United States regarding sanctions relief and future security architectures. If Washington cannot act as the broker, the diplomatic channel is fundamentally paralyzed.
That makes total sense.
But let's examine the actual mechanics of the pressure tactics themselves. Historically, if you analyze Russian strategic culture, backing them into an existential corner does not induce compliance. It triggers massive asymmetric escalation.
And the economic pressure tactics are highly flawed, too. I mean, Congress authorizes the executive branch to slap sweeping tariffs on Russian goods. But as anyone who has studied the U.S. economy over the last 2 years knows, tariffs are not paid by the exporting nation.
No, they're not.
They are essentially a consumption tax paid by the importing business and passed on to the consumer. So you aren't starving the Russian war machine. You are just increasing inflation for the American taxpayer.
Furthermore, the strategic application of this pressure, the continuous escalation of weapons deliveries, the creeping expansion of NATO's logistical footprint inside Ukraine, the loosening of rules of engagement for deep strikes, it all plays directly into the hands of the Kremlin.
How so?
It perfectly validates the core narrative Putin relies on to maintain domestic cohesion. He is no longer fighting a messy, unprovoked war of conquest against a weaker neighbor. He is fighting a wholly existential war of survival against the encroaching might of the entire NATO alliance.
Which changes everything for the average Russian.
Exactly. Mobilizing a population to fight a border dispute is difficult. Mobilizing a population to fight a defensive war against NATO is deeply ingrained in the Russian psyche.
Which leads us to the most complex and arguably the most dangerous example of this strategy backfiring. It's a technical integration project centered around something called Link 16.
Ah, yes.
I had to read this section of the source material a few times to fully grasp the implications because it sounds like bureaucratic jargon, but it is actually a massive strategic tripwire.
It absolutely is.
The current plan emanating from Europe is to help Ukraine build a highly sophisticated, multi-layered air defense network. But the critical caveat is that this new system is being explicitly designed to plug directly into NATO's Link 16 architecture.
We need to explain exactly what Link 16 is, because it is the linchpin of modern Western warfare.
Please do.
Link 16 is not just a secure radio channel or a chat room for generals. It is a highly encrypted, jam-resistant, tactical data link network.
Okay.
It utilizes time division, multiple access to allow aircraft, naval vessels, ground-based radars, and missile batteries to instantaneously share a unified, real-time picture of the battle space.
So mechanically, a NATO OASIS radar plane flying over Poland could detect an incoming Russian missile and instantly transmit that precise targeting data through Link 16 directly to a Ukrainian missile battery,
Exactly.
allowing them to fire without ever turning on their own radar and exposing their position.
Yes, it is the digital nervous system of the NATO alliance. It fuses thousands of disparate sensors into a single cohesive organism. And the current plan involves physically and digitally integrating Ukraine's military into this nervous system, including linking them into highly classified European and American space-based satellite architectures.
So put yourself in the shoes of a Russian intelligence officer sitting in the Kremlin right now. You are watching the Ukrainian military physically, digitally, and permanently hardwire its central nervous system into the Pentagon's mainframe. What is your strategic conclusion?
Your conclusion is that the entire justification for the war, the prevention of Ukraine becoming a forward operating base for NATO, is failing.
Right.
You conclude that even if Ukraine never formally signs the NATO treaty, They are becoming a de facto, fully integrated NATO asset right on your immediate border.
And this is where the paradox of maximum pressure becomes catastrophic.
It really does. If you incentivize the Russian high command to believe that a post-war Ukraine will simply be a heavily armed, fully integrated extension of NATO's digital architecture, they will radically harden their demands.
They aren't going to sue for peace. They are going to ensure there is nothing left to integrate.
Precisely. They will recalculate their minimum acceptable outcome. They will demand significantly more Ukrainian territory to act as a physical, geographic buffer zone against those NATO sensors.
That's terrifying.
And most brutally, they will dedicate themselves to ensuring that whatever rump state of Ukraine remains is so economically devastated, demographically hollowed out, and structurally broken that it can never function as a viable frontline military asset for the West.
So by aggressively integrating Ukraine into NATO's architecture to save it, the West is fundamentally destroying the exact conditions required for a negotiated settlement.
It's a tragic paradox.
Okay, let's pull all of these massive, sprawling threads together, because the picture that emerges from this deep dive is a global architecture that is just straining under the weight of its own contradictions.
Yes, it's buckling.
We started in East Asia, where the American Central Bank of Security is tightening its belt. Nations like Japan and Australia are terrified of the liquidity drying up, forcing them to frantically build regional networks to manage a perfectly normal, yet highly assertive, rising China.
Then we examine the strategic paralysis in Europe, a continent trapped in technological vassalage, economically tethered to Beijing, yet desperately performing diplomatic theater to keep the American hegemon fully engaged on their continent.
And that European desperation leads right into the meat grinder of Ukraine. We stripped away the triumphant media narratives to look at the brutal, unchangeable math, a society fracturing under the demographic weight of a positional war.
And an American defense industrial base that requires a half-decade to build interceptors while burning through 60% of its strategic reserve to swat down drones in the desert.
And we saw the fatal paradox of diplomacy, how the attempt to mask those deficits with maximum pressure, whether it's the operational fantasy of hunting mobile launchers or plugging Ukraine into NATO's Link 16 nervous system, only incentivizes the adversary to escalate, to demand more territory and permanently cripple the state we are attempting to defend.
This is exactly why understanding the underlying mechanics of these conflicts is so vital. It is the ultimate shortcut to becoming truly well-informed.
I completely agree.
When you understand the industrial constraints of a solid rocket motor, the demographic realities of a trench war, and the historical physics of how great powers behave, the daily political rhetoric simply falls away. You stop reacting to the headlines, and you start seeing the board for what it actually is.
And seeing the board clearly, understanding the math rather than the messaging, is the only way to anticipate the fractures before they happen. Which leaves us with a final, lingering question.
Okay.
Something I want you to mull over as you digest this massive amount of data. Our expert source, Jennifer Kavanaugh, made the compelling argument that American security guarantees have historically acted as a distortionary force, a bubble that allowed nations to comfortably ignore the harsh geopolitical gravity of their powerful neighbors.
Right. The distortionary bubble.
So what happens when the math finally breaks?
Right.
What happens if the American security umbrella actually permanently folds up?
It's the multi-trillion-dollar question.
Will the globe descend into a chaotic, violent free-for-all of regional wars? Or is it possible that, finally stripped of an artificial safety net, these nations will be forced to sit down, face the terrifying reality of their geography, and forge genuine, lasting diplomatic peace with their adversaries simply because they have absolutely no other choice?